Good morning again. For those of you that just joined us, I'm Terry Lewis, and Jen Bean is with me, and we're here from the Teaching and Learning team at IU13, and we're going to be talking about literacy assessment and figuring out how much did our students really lose, and how should we go, or where should we go from here?
Sorry.
So first, we were going to talk a little bit about what do the experts say about assessment, considering where we are now. And then how are we going to know where our students are in relation to ELA skills, and how can we plan accordingly?
So we're going to think, Terry and I, as well as I'm sure all of you have been looking at some research and trying to figure out what the experts are saying about ELA and where we are right now. So on the next slide, I'm going to have you all read some quotes. And then I'd like you to choose a golden line from the quotes and type it in the chat box. Can everybody see the quotes? Just me. Hopefully you can. If you can't, just let me know. Just give another minute or so. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, it looks like many of you thought the same thing we did about these quotes, and found some really great particular points. For example, Sharon, let's admit that we can't do everything and focus more narrowly on what will best help students succeed. And Megan, system leaders and educators need to identify exactly what unfinished learning needs to be addressed. Yes, and you're in the right place, because Terry and I have some great pointers and tips that will definitely help you go from here.
All right, so just as these quotes mentioned, we want to be thinking about what are the prerequisite skills that your students are going to be needing in just the first unit or two of your instruction for this fall. We can't possibly, just as you all mentioned, we can't go back and teach everything the students missed. We can't go back and assess everything the students missed. So we really need to be thinking about what do my students need right now for the first couple weeks of the school year. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just on either piece of paper or on a Google Doc of your own or somewhere, I'd like you to think about the first 2 units or topics you plan to teach in the fall, and list the skills that your students are going to need to be successful. So just make a quick list of the skills your students are going to need in the first couple weeks or maybe months of school. So we'll give you about 2 minutes to just create your list. And when you're finished with your list, if you could just either give me a thumbs up in the reactions section of Zoom, or you can type in the chat, okay, so I know you're ready. Okay, so it looks like most of you are ready. So we're going to go on. So, well, before we go to the next slide, so our next question would be, how do we know where each student is on that continuum? So do they have those skills? That's our next question that we have to answer. So the first thing we would do is we would want to, you can go on to next slide, please, Jen.
Sure.
What we'd like to do now is think about sorting those skills. So if we created a skills list, if we sorted those skills into 2 categories, so foundational or word work skills would be one category, and comprehension and analysis would be the next category. So thinking about your items on your list or your skills on the list, since you can't probably manipulate them easily, maybe you could just name them or label them really quick with an F for foundational and a C for comprehension and analysis. I'll just give you 30 seconds to go through your list and identify those 2 areas. Okay, so when we're thinking about how can we assess to see where our students are with those skills, if we're thinking about the foundational or word work skills, we may in the past have given some phonemic awareness or phonics surveys like core phonics, or maybe the past phonological awareness assessment or diagnostic decoding surveys. And those are awesome, wonderful resources and assessments. But the problem is they take a lot of time because they're administered one-on-one. So they would, take a few minutes or even up to 15, 20 minutes per student, which, as we know, we don't have a whole lot of time. We don't want to waste a lot of time. So we want to get into the work. And we may not have a lot of time with our students face to face. We'll see. But anyway, another way that you can measure those skills pretty quickly is through a spelling inventory. So we're going to talk through that in a little bit. I'm going to let Jen talk about her side for a minute.
Yeah, I think, and if you're thinking about comprehension and analysis, one way to take a look at both areas would be to provide a TDA instructional prompt, not a summative TDA prompt, but an instructional one, where you're adding the reading elements that you're teaching for that particular time, and then add that either element or structure to a prompt that you administer, and then take a look at where your kids are on a continuum from there. Okay. Would you like me to?
Yes, please.
Okay.
So thinking about how to use the spelling inventory or why to use it, first of all, it's group administered. So again, it would be more efficient than giving an individual assessment to each student. You can administer part or all of the spelling inventory. So depending on your grade level or the students that you're working with, you can just administer part of it. And it really does provide a window to phonemic awareness and phonics skills. So you get a lot of information in a short amount of time. I'm going to put in the chat box some links to some word or spelling inventories that you can get online for free. There are different versions. There's elementary, primary, and advanced spelling inventory. So again, depending on the students that you're working with in the grade level, you can find the most appropriate spelling inventory. So if you could go to the next slide, Jen.
Sure.
So how does a spelling inventory work? So basically it's just like a spelling test that you would give to your students. Again, it's group administered. All they would need would be a piece of paper and a pencil or a whiteboard and marker. And basically this is just the first part of the elementary spelling inventory, the first 10 words, but you would say bed. I hopped out of bed this morning, bed, and the students would write bed. So it's just a spelling test. So you see, this is just the first part. And again, if you were working with younger students, maybe you'd stop at number 10 and maybe you wouldn't go on to all 20 words. And once you give that assessment to your students, you would analyze each of the students' responses on this form. So you see on this form that you're assessing for certain spelling features in each word. So for example, on number 1 and number 2, each element is assessed separately. So they have an initial sound, a final sound, and a short vowel sound in number 1. And if they get those correctly, you would make a check mark next to each sound that they spelled correctly. And then in number 2, we also add a digraph. So they're getting credit for digraphs as well. But you see, like in number 3, there's no credit for the final sound of N. So that particular word is not assessing final sounds, okay, or final spellings. You see that the other, starting at number 4 through number 9, they're assessing blends, and in number 5 through 9, long vowel sounds that are common. Moving into number 10, now they're adding an inflectional ending. So each word is assessing different spelling features. So if you go to the next slide, Jen, please. So here's an example of 2 different students and their responses. So again, you would use that chart to analyze specific spelling features, but then you can also look overall at the students' words to answer the questions that are listed here. So for example, in student 1, is every sound represented with a logical letter choice? So let's just look at student 1's responses. You see the target word in the first column. In student 1's responses, is every sound represented with a logical letter choice? So I'm going to ask you to either type in the chat or you can unmute yourself and give an example of yes or no. So let's take a look at student 1's spelling of ship. Okay, the sounds in ship, as we know, are sh, I. So looking at the student's response, so for the sh sound, the student wrote an S. So S never makes the sh sound by itself, right? So that would not be a logical letter choice. The same thing with E for I. So the sound I is never spelled with an E, right? So therefore that's not a logical letter choice. So I also see that same problem like in lump, right? We have an O for the short U sound. We are missing the nasal sound the same thing with place. We're missing a sound ol. So therefore the student is missing a lot of sounds and not using a logical letter choice in student 1. So therefore, I see a lot of concerns with phonological awareness with the student. So just by, instead of doing a phonological awareness screener or diagnostic, I can just tell by this spelling inventory that the student is struggling phonologically. So therefore, I could use that information to work with the student in a small group with that focus. Now, how is that different than student 2? So is every sound represented with a logical letter choice in student 2? I'll give you a minute to think about that. If you want to type in the chat or unmute. I see Jennifer said yes. Okay, I agree with the yeses, right? So these students, even student 2, even though they're not always choosing the correct letter, they are making a logical letter choice. For example, in float, they use the consonant, the vowel consonant E pattern instead of the OA pattern, but that is a way to spell long O. Same thing with AI in place. And the rest of them, and same thing, of course, with train, right? So they are using correct letter choices. Logical letter choices, not necessarily correct letter choices. So therefore, I would work with this student not on phonological awareness, but on orthographic spelling features. And again, I would know exactly what those features are when I look at the spelling inventory analysis. So this student, it seems, has some trouble with long vowel spelling. So I would focus my instruction with this student and similar students with long vowels versus a group, focused on digraphs, for example, or blends. The student seems to have mastered digraphs and blends and short vowels, but the first skill that they would be weak in would be the long vowel sounds. So that's what I would work with this student on. So just looking at that last question on the slide, what can you tell about each of these students' skills in foundational or word work? So does anyone want to share what their thinking is? So just summarizing, the student 1, their skills are, or skills that they need support with, we can tell are more phonological, whereas student 2 has more orthographic skills, specifically around long vowels. So this quick example of spelling can really give us a lot of information about what students need in relation to foundational skills in a very efficient manner. Okay, thanks, Jen.
Yeah. All right, so if we're looking at text-dependent analysis and even comprehension, we would, you need to consider the first units that you plan to teach in the fall. And we asked, Terry did, for you to sort those skills that you may believe that your students would need for that particular unit. One unit or one reading element or a skill that you may come to mind when thinking of text-dependent analysis may be theme or even and characterization. So what I did was, if I were a teacher who had to take a look at my students quickly and address where they were on a continuum, thinking of reading comprehension and even text-dependent analysis or analysis, I automatically think of the TDA toolkit that the state has provided for us, and I have provided a link for you in the chat, which will take you to the materials that I have snipped here. This is part of one of the the documents that the state has provided for us, and it's in the area of for 4th grade. And the reading elements that they're looking at through this prompt are characterization and theme. And the state they provide you with an instructional prompt. So in this case, the prompt was, Authors often reveal information about a theme through the thoughts and actions of the characters. So you can see that this is somewhat of an instructional prompt, right? We wouldn't see that in a more summative type of prompt. Write an essay analyzing how the grandson demonstrates a theme about persistence when responding to the challenges of blueberry picking. So you can see here too that the author of this prompt was really intentional about talking about a theme of persistence, although they didn't do a theme statement here. So that's something you could assess to see whether or not your students know the difference between a theme and writing to a theme statement. And then the call to use evidence. So I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but we have these great learning progressions from the state, which talk about 3 different criteria areas that your students could be on in the area of reading comprehension, analysis, and essay writing. And within those, there are different criteria for what you might expect to see a student who is a beginning student in the area of reading comprehension, and emerging and developing and meaning. And this goes through reading comprehension also with analysis. And we can kind of take a look to see, after we give a prompt, where our students might be in this type of continuum, or as they call it, progression of learning, where their needs are and where their strengths are. So we're going to take a look at a student. So in this student, they were given the prompt that I read before. And if you take a look at the, I know the wording here is a little bit small, but on the side here, it gives you the student response, but then it also gives you a kind of a window into being a teacher who's received this writing, and then you have the progressions to use to instruct from. And then we're going to take a look at that writing and see where their strengths were. So here they're saying an understanding of the prompted passage is demonstrated by paraphrasing details from the text. There were inferences made in the students' responses. And they talked about the topic of perseverance, but the student didn't identify a theme statement. So for example, with perseverance, you can overcome any challenges or obstacles. This wasn't given. But they did give key details: how to pick, take a long time, they were dehydrated, the boy struggles when picking blueberries. So the student did give enough key details with some supported inferences to show that they were comprehending this grade level text, right? So if you took a look at the progressions, you could have enough evidence to say that they were meeting in the area of reading comprehension. But when you took a look for analysis at the progression, there was use of paraphrasing and direct quotes to support inferences. For example, the student gave evidence that they grabs handfuls and squishes some berries, and inferences frustrated. Sorry, it went out there. Inferences about the character and theme about persistence along with key details are included. He gets frustrated, he's not confident, he wants to quit. But what is lacking is a stronger explanation about connecting to the grandfather and how the grandfather showed the student the right way to pick the blueberries. And this encouraged him to be perseverance, to show perseverance and overcome his challenges. And then there are also ways that we could use the progression to look at essay writing, but I'm not going to get into that today here. But I wanted to show you the great resources that the state gives in the toolkit that they have. Provides us with possible next steps, right? So we noticed that this student didn't give a theme statement, but he only shared the theme topic, which was perseverance. And then there are possible next steps. For example, teaching the difference between a theme topic and a theme statement. Usually a one or two word labels such as love or friendship, right? That's the topic, perseverance. but a theme statement is what is said throughout the text as a whole. And theme statements are universal statements that can be applied to the real world. So for example, for love, love is stronger than hate would be a theme statement. And we would go about maybe doing an activity where we could talk to kids about the difference between the two. And then here it's just a simple organizer that explains, how a student can take explicit evidence, make an inference, right? But then what does that inference mean? And that's the connection to the analysis that the student was missing. And just by providing this organizer, that would be helpful. But you could see too, I'm going to go back here, how just like with Terry's her spelling inventory, right? We could take a look at different students and put them, find where they were on the inventory, the spelling inventory. You could do the same with your class for reading comprehension and also analysis, or even essay writing, right? And then group certain students where their strengths and needs are. So for example, this student was developing an analysis where another student may already have analysis as meeting, but their essay writing, could really use some work, so they would be in a different group. So you can see how we could also use these progressions in a similar way as we were using the inventories, but for different reasons, right? Okay.
So in this session, we really focused on thinking about where students are right now and trying to figure that out in an efficient manner. So we talked about the spelling inventory, getting a quick glimpse of where our students are with foundational skills in a group administered manner. And then Jen talked about getting some information about our students, their ability to comprehend and analyze through a quick instructional TDA prompt. So thinking about those things, then using the data that we collect from those two sources to figure out where our students are and maybe group them appropriately with other students for instruction. So before we finish up with a takeaway document, does anyone have any questions?